As the man worked, he noticed a demonic symbol carved into the cargo he was responsible for transporting. Fear gripped him, and he instinctively let go of the rope in his hands. The wooden crate, now untethered, plummeted rapidly, on the verge of striking Toby. At the last second, Clemens reacted swiftly, preventing a disaster. The captain, seeing Toby shaken, immediately ordered the crew to detain the sailor. However, the man insisted he recognized the symbol on the crate. It was an ominous sign. His words caused a wave of unease to ripple through the crew. Despite their fears, the promise of a hefty payment for delivering the crates to the London Abbey before sunset forced everyone to push forward. They continued loading the ship, bringing aboard a goat essential for their voyage. Unbeknownst to them, the earlier impact had loosened the seal on one of the crates. An unprecedented calamity was about to befall them all. Soon, the ship Mortar set sail, leaving the port behind. On shore, the client who had commissioned the delivery of the crates watched the ship disappear into the horizon and silently made a gesture of prayer. As the sun set, its golden light reflecting off the calm sea, all seemed tranquil. But once night fell, strange and inexplicable events began to unfold. In the cargo hold, the crate bearing the demonic symbol started to stir. The ropes securing it began to unravel on their own. The rats in the hold, sensing something malevolent, scurried away in panic. Other animals grew restless, their agitation evident as they tried to escape. On the deck, a sailor scanning the horizon through a telescope suddenly saw a pale, ghastly face. The sight nearly frightened him out of his wits. Yet when he looked again, it seemed to vanish. Rattled, he reported the incident to Clemens, who assured him there had been no one else on deck. Convinced he must have been hallucinating, the sailor turned to leave. Meanwhile, in the shadows below deck, a dog spotted a figure in the darkness. Before it could bark, the creature pounced, killing it instantly. Around midnight, the ship's cook ventured into the cargo hold to check on the goat, which he had grown fond of. Stumbling in the dark, he nearly tripped over something. Lifting his lantern, he was horrified to discover the lifeless body of the dog. Panicked, the man searched the cargo hold, only to find that all the livestock had been gruesomely slaughtered. Even the goat had fallen victim, its blood completely drained, as though by some kind of beast. The air grew heavy with a sense of foreboding, and the man's earlier warnings echoed in everyone's mind. In an effort to calm the crew, Captain Elliot ordered Clemens to inspect the crates bearing dragon-shaped symbols for any irregularities. When Clemens reached the lowest deck, he found that one of the crates had toppled over during the ship's motion. Approaching it, he was hit by the stench of foul black soil spilling out from inside. Driven by curiosity, Clemens stepped closer to examine it. Suddenly, strange noises from above caught his attention. To his shock, he spotted a woman lying amidst the dirt, barely alive. On closer inspection, he realized she was strikingly beautiful. As the ship's accompanying doctor, Clemens quickly deduced that the woman had been infected by a virus and required a transfusion of healthy blood to survive. However, seasoned sailors knew that having a woman on board was an ill omen. With no one willing to help, Clemens had no choice but to take out his equipment and personally perform the blood transfusion. Little did he know, the woman lying unconscious was none other than Dracula's chosen bride. The reason she hadn't been turned yet was because, until they reached their destination, the woman still had a role to play as a living blood bag to sustain the ravenous monster. Though Clemens saved her, the monster, now deprived of its food source, would inevitably turn its attention to the sailors. Before long, a sailor on watch heard sudden movement on the deck. Thinking it was a crewmate playing a prank, he deliberately made noise in response. When he approached, he realized that a vent cover in the cargo hold had been forcibly knocked loose from within. Faint, slurping sounds emanated from the darkness. Suppressing his fear, he cautiously followed the sound, only to find a frail figure crouched in a corner. He drew his knife and was about to ask why the person was on board when the figure suddenly attacked, slashing the sailor's throat. Sweet blood sprayed across the deck as the man collapsed. The creature immediately crouched over the body, licking up the blood to regain its strength. Then, grabbing the lifeless sailor, it began to feast with wild abandon. By the time Clemens noticed the disturbance and arrived on deck, the monster was already gone. The sailor on duty had vanished without a trace. Clemens saw the broken vent cover and the bloodied knife on the deck. Sensing something was terribly wrong, he rang the alarm to alert the crew. At dawn, the crew searched the entire ship but found no sign of the missing sailor. They convinced themselves he must have fallen overboard in a drunken stupor. Just then, the woman Clemens had saved regained consciousness. Trembling with fear, she revealed that Dracula was hiding on the ship and that they needed to leave immediately. But in the vast, desolate ocean, where could they escape to? However, the Mortel was pressing Elliot's life and wealth, and he could not easily give up the result of hard work for most of his life just because of a woman's word. Desperate, the woman showed Clemens the bite marks on her body, explaining that every night the monster emerged to hunt. Her village's elder had sacrificed her to Dracula in exchange for their safety, sending the creature across the sea to terrorize England instead. If they didn't abandon ship to save themselves, they'd all become the monster's prey before reaching their destination. As night fell once more, Dracula climbed onto the deck. The sailor on duty had no idea he had become the next target. Before he could even get a clear look at Dracula, his life was snuffed out. The remaining men were paralyzed with fear at the monster's sinister smile. One sailor climbed the mast in a desperate bid to escape, but Dracula was not about to let his prey slip away. With the helmsman dead, the ship began to lurch uncontrollably in the fierce wind and rain. The crew braced themselves against the chaos, scrambling onto the deck to steer the vessel and narrowly avoiding a complete disaster. When they prepared to hold the night watch accountable, they discovered the men had already vanished. Suddenly, a drop of blood fell from above onto Captain Elliot's son's shoulder. Looking up, they spotted a man hanging precariously, barely alive. The crew immediately rushed to rescue him. When the sailor finally regained consciousness, he was agitated and violent, forcing the crew to bind him tightly with ropes before Clemens could barely manage to stitch the gaping wound on his neck. No one knew what had truly transpired the night before, but the man's injuries strongly suggested the presence of something unclean lurking aboard the ship. As nightfall approached, the crew armed themselves and began a thorough search of the ship. However, by the time the sun dipped below the horizon, they had found nothing. When darkness fell, the restrained sailor began thrashing wildly. As one of the coffins slowly creaked open, the man appeared to lose all sense of self, his mind completely overtaken, becoming Dracula's puppet. Toby, hearing the commotion, approached to check on the sailor. But the man, his eyes blank and white, suddenly grabbed Toby by the shoulders and began dragging the child, intending to offer him to Dracula. Fortunately, in a moment of desperation, Toby cut his own hair to slip free of the sailor's grip. Using his small size to his advantage, he narrowly escaped the man's clutches. Once back in the captain's quarters, Toby locked the doors and windows, frantically banging on the ship's wooden walls in an attempt to signal for help. The sailors on deck understood the message and rushed below to rescue him, managing to subdue the mutated sailor just in time. However, as Toby sat in the room trying to catch his breath, he suddenly noticed a shadowy figure lurking in the corner, but when he stood up to get a closer look, the spot was empty. The sailors outside attempted to open the locked door, but found it impossible to budge. Then, in an instant, the crew fell silent. Through a crack in the door, they saw a monstrous figure inside the room, moving unnaturally toward Toby. Before anyone could act, the creature launched a ferocious attack, biting Toby. By the time the crew broke through the door, it was already too late. Toby lay in a pool of blood, barely clinging to life, while the monster had vanished. With 5 days still left before reaching their destination, the crew felt as though they were trapped in a nightmare. To prevent the puppet-like sailor from harming anyone else, they tied him to the deck. But as dawn broke and sunlight touched the sailor's skin, he let out a horrifying scream. Within moments, his body erupted into flames and crumbled to ashes. It became clear that Toby, now bitten, would likely suffer the same fate, eventually transforming into one of the monsters. Since Toby was too young to survive a blood transfusion like Anna, the only way to stop his transformation was to kill Dracula. Instead, they waited for nightfall before conducting a thorough search of the dragon-marked crates. Meanwhile, the cook, driven by fear and desperation, knocked out a fellow sailor and attempted to escape alone on a lifeboat. But before he could get far, a dense fog enveloped the sea, making navigation impossible. Around him, terrifying sounds of slicing air and sinister whispers echoed, striking fear into his heart. As Dracula went hunting, Clemens and the others found nothing in the crates but an old, ominous cane. When the crew discovered that the lifeboat had vanished, they were horrified to see the blood-stained vessel mysteriously drift back to the ship on its own. It was now clear. Dracula was feeding in a controlled manner, killing one person each day to sustain himself until they reached the port. With Toby already succumbing to the monster's curse, his fate sealed to the depths of the ocean. The crew realized they could not allow Dracula to reach London. With only one day left until their destination, they devised a desperate plan. They would set a trap to confine Dracula on the ship, sink the morteur to the ocean floor, and escape on the remaining lifeboats. This slim chance of survival reignited their determination. Under the daylight, they sealed the cargo hold's hatch and created a path that would force Dracula to emerge on the deck. Anna volunteered to distract the monster, while the other two sailors positioned themselves at elevated sniper spots, ready to fire as soon as Dracula revealed himself. But as night fell, a thick fog once again rolled in, swallowing the morteur whole. The heavy mist made it impossible for the snipers to locate Dracula. All they could hear was the ominous sound of wings beating overhead. It was then they realized the monster's speed was lightning fast. Before one of the men could fire a shot, Dracula swooped in, dragged him off his perch, and killed him on the spot. The remaining sailor, now terrified, scrambled down a rope to escape but collided with Dracula midair. Though he survived the attack, he felt his legs snap upon hitting the deck. Realizing another strike was imminent, the injured man urged Clemens to prepare the lifeboat while he used an amplifier to lure Dracula into the cargo hold. Once inside, he locked the doors and smashed a hole in the hull, intending to sacrifice himself and the ship to take Dracula down. But Dracula, having anticipated the move, burrowed through the side of the grain storage and ambushed the sailor, ending his life. Afterward, Dracula sought out Captain Elliot, who was steering the ship through the storm. The captain's magical wards and spells had no effect on the monster, who killed him in an instant. By the time Clemens arrived on deck, it was already too late. Overwhelmed with both fear and rage, Clemens screamed curses at Dracula, vowing to destroy him no matter what. Enraged by Clemens's defiance, Dracula swooped down, landing a short distance away before launching a direct attack. Clemens quickly fell to the deck, helpless and waiting for the fatal blow. At the critical moment, Anna fired a surprise shot at Dracula, saving Clemens from certain death. Dracula moved with lightning speed, knocking Anna's rifle from her hands. Spreading its wings, it enveloped her entirely, sinking its fangs deep into her neck to drain her blood. In a desperate bid to save her, Clemens picked up an axe and attacked Dracula from behind, shouting for Anna to escape to the lifeboat. Enraged, Dracula turned on Clemens, gripping him by the throat and slashing a deep wound across his neck. Blood mixed with the rain, dripping down as Dracula's hunger grew uncontrollable. It opened its jaws wide, ready to feast. Unexpectedly, Anna took advantage of his inattention to cut the hemp rope on the fence, rendering the entire boat immobile. Seeing this, Dracula let go of Clemens, and just as he was about to go over to help Anna, the two of them jumped into the sea. The fence pole smashed down on Dracula, who had not had time to react, while Anna and Clemens tried to escape in the boat. At this moment, the night watchman on the lighthouse noticed that the Mortimer was about to dock, which meant that Dracula had finally arrived in London. The next morning, as the sun was about to rise, Clemens and Anna survived by clinging to the floating wooden pole. However, when he saw the shore, he saw Anna's pupils turn white, which meant that she was about to transform into a vampire. However, even in death, she did not want to become a monster. After bidding farewell to Clemens, she climbed onto the plank and embraced the baptism of the sun. Soon, news of the Morteur's tragic sinking spread across the streets of London. The news reported that no survivors had been found in the shipwreck, but Clemens knew in his heart that the monster was hiding somewhere in the UK. Even if he had to travel all over Great Britain, he would personally kill the monster.